Fellas, there's a big debate of who the greatest of all time is in the UFC. Some people think it's John Jones, like me. Some people think it's GSP. Some people think it's Anderson Silva, and some people think it's Khabib. Not long ago, I did a video where I basically compared the career of John Jones and GSP, and I tried to decide out of the two of them who had the better career and who's the greatest of all time. And the end of it was John Jones. If you want to know why, go watch that video. But today, we're going to be debating two other people in the greatest of all time list, which is Khabib and Anderson Silva. A lot of people, for some reason, still think Habib's the GOAT. A lot of people think Anderson Silva's the GOAT. So we're gonna be comparing the legacies of them today. And by the way, this isn't me saying that the winner of these two is actually the greatest of all time. I'm just comparing the legacies of the two of them. I already did a video like this, as I said, between John Jones and GSP. So don't be mad if I say one of them is the greatest. I mean the greatest out of the two of them. But we're gonna be comparing them right now today in this video. So we're going to go with the first thing to compare them with. And for me, let's look at the record between both of them. This is a very important statistic you kind of need to look at when you're comparing the greatest of all time. So let's go with, the Dagestani hybrid Khabib. 29-0, pretty flawless record, right? 29 wins, no losses. It's a pretty flawless record, to be honest with you. You can't really go wrong with that. Never lost a fight. I mean, it would have been better if it was 30, because I don't know, it would have looked better, wouldn't it? But yeah, 29-0, flawless record. Never lost a fight in his life, and that's why a lot of people think Khabib is the greatest of all time. A lot of kind of the casuals that don't really watch UFC really often, they look at Khabib's record and decide, listen, he's never lost a fight. He must be the greatest of all time. Then we look at Anderson Silva, 34-11, not quite as good as Khabib's, but I mean he's got a lot more. He's got a couple more wins than Khabib. He's got 5 more wins, but that 11 losses is definitely that's stinging his record. So when it comes down to pure record, and I'm not talking about the wins, I'm talking about pure. If you look at both of the records, who's is better? It's obviously going to Khabib. But then it kind of gets more important when we look at the notable wins. Khabib's notable wins are Conor McGregor, obviously the biggest fight in the UFC. He absolutely dominated Conor McGregor, and that was a great fight for Khabib. Dominated McGregor in front of everybody. Obviously, the Justin Gaethje fight that kind of aged well, because look where Gaethje's at now. The only person he's lost to in recent times is since the Khabib fight is Oliveira. So that win aged really well, and he finished both of them. He also finished Dustin Poirier, who's one of the greatest lightweights of all time. He's up there in one of the best lightweights. Other people, Rafael dos Anjos, Michael Johnson, Edson Barboza, all of those people in the lightweight. Like, people always say to me, listen, Khabib's overrated. He's only beaten 3 top lightweights. But when you look at his actual record, he's actually got a pretty decent, he's got a pretty decent set of notable wins. To beat all those people, that's quite impressive. And then we go on to Anderson Silva, who's obviously fighting in a different era, but he's got wins over Dan Henderson. He was tough as nails. Forrest Griffin. I mean, that Forrest Griffin fight it seemed like he was bullying him. Then we've got Chael Sonnen, the greatest of all time. Damian Maia, Vitor Belfort, that front kick to the face. And that was a fully roided Vitor Belfort as well, which is impressive. And Stephen Bonner. You can also go with Derek Brunson, I guess. I mean, he's not in the UFC anymore. I think he's just retired as Derek Brunson. But I guess you could say Derek Brunson as well. Plus, that was an old Anderson Silva that beat Derek Brunson. So when you're comparing the notable wins, I mean, I don't know who to pick, but you guys can, pick down below who's got the better notable wins. And then we go on to a final statistic to do with the record. We go to Khabib. He's arguably never lost a round in the UFC. I mean, never, what's it called? Never mind never losing a fight. He's never lost a single round, people think. Some people tend to think that he lost a round against McGregor. Some people think he lost a round against Gleison Tibau. But, I mean, you say what you want, Khabib never lost a round, arguably. And then Anderson Silva, he had a 17-fight win streak in the UFC. I'm not saying he had 17 title defenses. I'm saying he had 17-fight win streak in the UFC, which is very impressive. And before all you Khabib fans start commenting saying, "Oh, Khabib, Khabib's 29-0, what is that?" Anderson Silva, 17 in the UFC. I'm not talking about MMA record. I'm talking about pure UFC. Anderson Silva, that's a pretty impressive win streak to go on a 17-fight win streak in the UFC, but when we look at records, I'd probably edge it towards, when we look at the record 29-0 or 34-11, it's got to go to Khabib, especially with the fact he's never lost a round. But if we go to notable wins, they're kind of even, because in Anderson Silva's era, those were tough fighters, and obviously Khabib, he's got a pretty decent resume, so it's pretty even right now when we go to records. You can kind of sway it one way or another. Anyway, then we move on to the next kind of factor that decides if they're the greatest of all time, which is titles and defenses. Now, this is what a lot of people like to bring up in the GOAT conversation. Khabib has 3 title defenses. Now, to say that Khabib's arguably meant to be one of the greatest of all times and he only has 3 title defenses, that isn't great on his record. I'm going to be honest. To call yourself the greatest and only have 3 defenses, it's not that impressive, to be honest with you. You're expecting a little bit more than just 3 defenses from Khabib. I mean, Aljamain Sterling's got 3 defenses as well. Obviously, he beat Peter Yan, TJ Dillashaw, Henry Cejudo, so 3 defenses isn't impressive. And Anderson Silva's got 10, which is more than impressive. I mean, nowadays champions are barely even reaching like 4 or 5 title defenses in a row, so it's hard for champions to even reach that much nowadays. So for Anderson Silva to go out there and get 10 of them, you've got to give him props, man. Some of them, one of the longest title defense streaks in the UFC. So you got to respect Anderson Silva for that. He definitely takes the defenses. Both of them held the belt in one weight class. Neither of them was ever double champ in the UFC, which a lot of people like to stain them for. Some people think, oh, listen, Khabib never held the belt in welterweight, for example, so he can't be the greatest of all time. But yeah, neither of them have held the belt outside of obviously middleweight for Silva and lightweight for Khabib. And then you look at the title fight losses. Obviously, Khabib's undefeated. He's never lost a title fight in his life. Anderson Silva has lost 2 title defenses, both to Chris Weidman. Obviously, the time where he was showboating and then got KO'd, and then the other time where he also got KO'd. So yeah, title defenses. There's a way more defenses to Silva. So I'm going to have to give title defenses to Anderson Silva. You've got to give it to Anderson Silva. He's got way more defenses than Khabib, which is kind of the one that kind of really sets the bar between the two of them. I mean, to get 10 and 3, it's a massive gap. But we'll move on anyway to the next and final kind of factor that's deciding if they're the greatest of all time, which is other statistics. We look at the first section, clean athlete. Anderson Silva was popped for steroids, which, you know, that's that. A lot of people, a lot of MMA fans, you know, they hear that a fighter's popped for steroids and they like to kind of immediately take them out of the GOAT conversation. Personally, I think it knocks them down a bit. I don't think it completely takes them out, but Anderson Silva has taken steroids, and Khabib, he's a clean athlete. Listen, you can say what you want about Khabib, but he's a clean athlete. Come on, he's never taken a steroid. And then we look at the next statistic, which is, well, not a statistic, but things that you can kind of poke Khabib at, you know, kind of knock him down. Did he have a padded record? Was Khabib's record kind of padded before the UFC? Was he just fighting bums? You can make your own opinion on that, but you look at Khabib's record, 29, I know it looks flawless, but when you really take a deep dive and look at his early UFC career, like his first 15, 20 wins, were they padded? Were they really that, not a UFC career, MMA career, but were they really that good? And another thing you can question Khabib on, did he retire too early? Did he retire too early? He retired on only 3 defenses. So maybe Khabib retired too early. Maybe he was too scared to face the rest of the lightweights. That's not what I'm saying, but maybe he was. Anderson Silva. Another thing that you can poke at Anderson Silva is that he's got 11 losses on his record, which it's kind of hard to argue that Anderson Silva's the greatest of all time when he won 1 out of his last 8. And the thing is with the statement greatest of all time, it's about being the greatest actually of all time, not just for one period of time, not just for a couple of years, the greatest of all time. Anderson Silva wasn't. He surely wasn't the greatest of actually all time. He won 1 out of his last 8. How can you call yourself the greatest when you've won 1 out of your last 8 and you've got 11 losses on your record? Now, I'm not saying he's not, but it's kind of hard to argue that he is when he's only got, you know, when he's got 11 losses and won 1 out of his last 8. So a lot of people like to, well, especially me, like to bring that up as well. Whereas Khabib obviously never lost a fight. And then we look at the career length. This kind of determines how long they were in the UFC. So was it as impressive? Khabib was in the UFC for 8 years with a 2-year layoff, and Anderson Silva was in the UFC for 14 years. With no layoff really. I mean, there was a period of time where he took like 2 years off, but he left the UFC in the December. Well, he didn't leave the UFC, but he took a little break, but I won't call it a layoff. Whereas Khabib obviously took a 2-year layoff. I think it was 2014 to 2016 he didn't fight. So Anderson Silva has the longer career length, which kind of means that, you know, he was around longer. He didn't retire too early. And you could argue that if Khabib had 14 years in the UFC, maybe he would have lost a fight. Maybe he would have gone on a losing streak. You never know. So that's a statistic that, in my opinion, goes in favour of Anderson Silva. But the final, who do I think is the greatest between the two of them? It's got to be Anderson Silva. I think Anderson the Spider Silva. If I had to pick a winner between the two of them, it is very close. But I'm going to go with Anderson Silva. I'm going to go with Silva. He had the defenses on him. I mean, we look back at all of them. He had way more defenses than him. He did have a longer career length. Obviously, I know there's other statistics that I read that kind of favour Khabib, but he had a longer career length. He had some pretty decent notable wins. He had a massive win streak in the UFC. If we're talking the better MMA fighter and the better MMA career, I guess you can go Khabib for that. But if we're talking just pure UFC, it's got to be Anderson Silva. So I'm gonna go with Anderson Silva for the greatest one in the UFC. But please let me know in the comments, who do you think's better between Anderson Silva and Khabib? Personally, I think it's Silva, not by a lot though. I literally think they're one space away from each other in the GOAT conversation. But please let me know who you think's the better one between these two. And yeah, thank you for watching.